Welcome to Under Baobab Skies. Tonight, I want you to imagine something. Imagine the air itself becoming a kind of membrane, a living skin that carries not just sound, but meaning. Let this air transport us to the lush, river-cut lands of Senegambia, where the red earth meets the green floodplains of the mighty Gambia River. Here, under a sky so vast it seems to curve with the drum's own belly, sound was never just for entertainment. It was anatomy. It was the skeleton of law, the muscle of history, the very blood that pumped through the body of the entire community. Now, close your eyes. Feel that humid heat, fragrant with blooming bougainvillea, wet clay, and the distant salt tang of the Atlantic Ocean. Hear the chorus of evening insects tuning their tiny wings. But listen deeper. Beneath it all, carried on the still air from a distant compound, comes a sound that isn't quite music. It's a deep, woody boom. Then a pause, followed by a rapid, chattering tak-tak-tak-a-boom. It sounds conversational. It feels declarative. This is the sound of the drum speaking. In this world, the drummer was never just a performer. He was a griot, a historian. He was a yali, a living library, a custodian of lineages. He was the town crier, the telegraph, the courtroom stenographer, and the ancestral medium, all rolled into one. His instrument was carved from a sacred tree, hallowed by ritual, and tuned to the very pitch of human speech. Its intricate rhythms could announce a birth, codify a marriage contract, mobilize an entire army, deliver a final legal verdict, or recite the genealogy of a king going back 20 generations without missing a single ancestor. It was a technology of memory, powered by rhythm and resonance. Let's just pause for a moment here. Imagine we're gathered, and the fire crackles gently as the night breathes around us. Now, imagine that crackle as a rhythm. Imagine it forming a pattern you could actually understand, a pattern that says the fire is warm, or the stars are emerging, or remember the story of the first flame. This was the everyday reality of the Senegambian drum. It turned the entire world into a conversation, where every sound had the potential for deep meaning, and the community was bound together by a shared, unspoken language that they felt in their bones. This is a story about a language made of vibration. It is about how a whole community could hear a sequence of tones, and pauses and understand a complete, complex sentence, like, "The council meets at the kapok tree when the sun touches the termite mound." It is about justice that was not just seen and heard, but was felt in the resonant thump of a taut goatskin stretched over a hollowed log. But it's also a story of a fading grammar, a precious linguistic heritage held in the trembling, experienced hands of the last elders who can still make the wood and skin speak in full, complex paragraphs. These are the last living dictionaries of a language on the brink of silence. Before we delve deeper into this incredible world, I want you to do something. Settle into the rhythm of your own breath. Feel your own heartbeat become the foundational pulse. We are about to enter the sacred forest where the drum is not yet a drum, but a living tree, dreaming of the day it will become a voice. So, what exactly made these drums talk? It wasn't just random banging. The drummers were masters of tone and pitch. By squeezing the ropes that held the drum skin tight, or by striking different parts of the drum. Head the center, the edge with their hands, or with curved sticks, they could mimic the tonal patterns of local languages like Wolof or Sip. These languages are tonal, meaning the pitch of a syllable can change its meaning entirely. The drummer, therefore, was not just playing rhythms. He was speaking sentences. A high tone followed by a low tone might mean come, while a low tone followed by a high tone could mean go. It was a precise, nuanced art form. a symphony of meaning that everyone in the village was fluent in from birth. We're going to explore how these rhythms built societies, settled disputes, and carried the soul of a people across generations. We'll meet the keepers of this ancient knowledge and listen to the stories that only the drums can tell. This is more than just history. It's a journey into a different way of hearing the world. Thank you for joining me on this first step. Stick around, subscribe, and let's continue this journey together, under the baobab skies. In the heart of Senegal, where tradition breathes through the rustling leaves of ancient trees, the making of a drum begins not with an axe, but with an ear. It's a journey into a world where every tree has a voice, and only a chosen few are destined to speak for the people. By the end of our story today, you'll understand why selecting a drum tree is a profound spiritual audition, a sacred conversation, not a simple act of forestry. The forest was not a wilderness. It was a council chamber. The trees were elders, silent witnesses to generations of history. Through this dappled green light moved Fode, a master drummer from a long line of masters. His face was a landscape of deep, benevolent lines, etched by sun and wisdom. He moved with a silence that was itself a form of speech, a deep respect for the sacred ground he walked upon. Behind him, struggling to match his quiet, deliberate pace, was Lamin, his 12-year-old grandson. Lamin was restless, an apprentice, more eager to beat the drum than to understand its soul. They were in the Bois Saker, the sacred wood. For 10 generations, this very forest had provided the drums for their wall-off village. They weren't looking for firewood or timber for a house. Their quest was for something far more precious, a dim tree or Cordilla africana, renowned for its resonant, singing quality. But not just any dim could become an ender or a tom of the lead, talking drums that carry the village's history, its warnings, its celebrations. Only a tree with a special spirit would do. Fode paused, placing a gentle hand on his grandson's shoulder. "We are not here to take," he whispered, his voice like the rustle of dry leaves against the forest floor. "We are here to listen. The drum must first speak to us before it can speak for us." Lamin looked around, seeing only a sea of green and brown. He heard only insects and distant birds. What was there to listen to? Fode led them to a towering dim, its trunk thick and gnarled with age. He didn't assess its girth or its height. Instead, he did something that baffled Lamin. He placed his ear directly against the rough, grey bark and closed his eyes. His body became utterly still, a statue carved into the living wood. He was listening, not to the wind, but to the tree's own interior life, the almost imperceptible hum of sap flowing through its veins, the minute creaks of growth, the silent memory of 100 dry seasons and 100 life-giving rains. It was a language spoken in vibrations, a history stored in cellulose and spirit. After a long, reverent moment, Fode reached into a small leather pouch at his waist and pulled out a smooth, dark riverstone. He held it lightly and tapped the trunk. Toke. The sound was flat, dull, lifeless. It was as if the wood absorbed the impact, swallowing the sound before it could even be born. Fode shook his head slowly, a look of gentle dismissal on his face. "This one's heart is sleeping," he said, his voice soft but certain. Its voice would be a mumble. "It cannot carry our stories with a sleepy heart." They moved on, deeper into the sacred wood. Lamin's initial curiosity was quickly turning into impatience. The sun was getting higher, and the trees, to his young eyes, all looked the same. How could his grandfather hear such profound differences in what seemed like identical pieces of wood? He wanted to feel the taut skin of a drum beneath his palms, to learn the complex rhythms that made people dance and cry. He didn't want to spend his day listening to silent wood. Fode stopped again, before another impressive specimen. Again, the ritual of listening, the closing of the eyes, the attunement to the tree's inner world. Then, the tap with the river stone. This time, the sound was completely different. It was a high, sharp ring, almost metallic, that pierced the quiet of the forest. Lamin jumped, startled by its intensity. Fode murmured, more to himself than to the boy, too anxious. A drum from this wood would shriek under pressure. In times of trouble, it would distort the message in fear, not carry it with courage. They came to a third tree. It was enormous, but when Fode tapped it, there was almost no sound at all, just a soft thud, as if the tree were hollow. Empty, Fode stated simply. A drum must be full of potential, like a pregnant silence waiting to give birth to sound. This one has nothing to say. It has no stories of its own to share. Lamin's frustration grew. Anxious, sleeping, empty, he kicked at a root, earning a gentle but firm glance from his grandfather. To him, this was a pointless exercise. Wood was wood. The skill was in the carving, the stretching of the hide, the hands of the player, or so he thought. Just as Lamin was about to complain, they came to a small clearing. Standing slightly apart from the other trees was a dim of medium size. It wasn't the straightest or the tallest. It didn't look particularly special. But as they approached, a strange thing happened. A light breeze, which had been a constant, gentle whisper throughout the forest, seemed to focus on this one spot. It sighed through the leaves of this particular tree with a distinct, melodic sound, completely different from its neighbors. It was a soft, rhythmic shush-shush-shaw, like a whispered secret being shared just with them. Fode's eyes lit up. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile of recognition, of finding a long-lost friend. He approached the tree not as a forester, but as a pilgrim approaching a shrine. He placed both his hands flat on the trunk, feeling its texture, its temperature, its life. He closed his eyes, and this time he stood there for so long that a sunbeam, piercing the canopy, moved from his shoulder all the way across his still, patient form. He was no longer just listening. He was in communion. Finally, he took out the river stone one last time. He held it up, and with a light but deliberate motion, he tapped the trunk. Dung! The sound was unlike anything before. It was not a flat toke or a sharp ring. It was a deep, clear, resonant note that seemed to hang in the warm air, vibrating not just in their ears, but deep within Lamin's chest. It was a sound with weight, with presence, with absolute clarity. It was a sound that felt ancient and alive all at once. It wasn't loud, but it filled the entire clearing with its voice. Fode opened his eyes and turned to Lamin, his smile wide and full of joy. "Ah," he breathed, a sigh of pure contentment. "There you are. We have been waiting for you." He gestured for Lamin to come closer. "This is the one. Do you hear it? Its heart is awake. Its voice is clear and calm. It is not shouting. It is not sleeping. It is ready. It has been waiting to be asked." And in that moment, as the deep note finally faded back into the forest's hum, Lamin, for the first time, understood. He finally heard it. This wasn't a search for raw material. It was a search for a partner. He was listening for a personality, for a vessel that already contained the essential qualities needed for truth-speaking. Clarity, resonance, stability, and a calm, willing spirit. The drum was not made from wood. It was revealed from it. The tree wasn't just being cut down. It was being invited to begin a new and more important life, to take on its most critical work as a voice for the community. The first and most crucial conversation, the silent one between the drummer's soul and the tree's spirit, was complete. Now, and only now, could they proceed with the ceremony of asking it to leave the forest and join the world of men. to lend its voice to their stories for generations to come. The tree now had a name. Fode called it Ker Gui, the House of Voice. For what was about to happen was not just felling a tree. It was a ritual of passage, a birth. The entire village had to be involved, because this drum, this gem, would become the voice of the community. So, the community itself must witness and bless its very beginning. At dawn the next day, the men of the village gathered at the edge of the sacred wood. They didn't bring an arsenal of tools, just the essentials, the ceremonial axe. Its iron head darkened by libations of palm wine from countless rituals past, and strong ropes woven from thick vine. The women and children waited at the tree line, forming a silent, respectful circle, their presence a powerful testament to the moment's importance. Fode, dressed in a simple, flowing white bubu, stood before Ker Gui. He was the griot, the master drummer, the keeper of this ancient tradition. At the base of the mighty tree, he carefully placed the offerings. A white kola nut split open to reveal its pure interior. A small, smooth calabash filled with palm wine, and a handful of pristine white rice. He then took the calabash and slowly poured the palm wine onto the roots. The rich, fermented scent mingled with the smell of the damp, loamy earth, filling the morning air. Then Fode spoke. His voice, formal and clear, carried through the quiet of the forest. "Great One," he intoned, "Ker Gui, we have heard your clear voice. We thank you for your long watchfulness in this forest. We ask you now to begin a new journey, to leave your rooted silence and learn the language of movement and speech, to carry our stories, our laws, our joys, and our sorrows. We promise to honor your voice. We promise to make it speak only truth." After his prayer, he took the ceremonial axe. He didn't swing it with brute force or aggression. This was an act of respect, not conquest. He simply placed the blade against the trunk on the side that faced the village, and with a single, firm, reverent tap, he broke the bark. This was a symbolic first cut. It was a formal invitation. The actual, strenuous work of felling the tree would be done by the younger, stronger men, but the intention, the sacred purpose, was now set by the master. And now, the coordinated, rhythmic work began. 2 men, agile as monkeys, climbed into the neighboring trees. Their job was to secure guide ropes high up on Ker Gui's trunk, ensuring it would fall in the right direction. Meanwhile, other men on the ground began cutting a precise wedge on the village side of the trunk. Their axes were sharp, their strikes efficient and powerful. But there was no reckless haste. Every movement was deliberate. As chips of the sacred wood flew from the cut, they were carefully caught on a clean white cloth spread on the ground. Nothing was to be wasted or disrespected. These chips would later be used to fuel the fire for hollowing out the drum, ensuring that every part of the tree was honored in the process. As the cut deepened, the men holding the guide ropes began to pull. It wasn't a sudden, violent jerk, but a steady, powerful, singing strain. They chanted a low, rhythmic pulling song, their voices and their effort sinking into one fluid motion. Samayun, why path? My path, my path. The words were a prayer and a command. They weren't just pulling down a tree. They were guiding it, leading it gently from its ancient home toward its new life, its new destiny within the community. Suddenly, a deep, groaning creak echoed through the forest, a sound that seemed to come from the very heart of the wood itself. Ker Gui began to lean. It didn't crash or snap. It leaned slowly, gracefully, almost thoughtfully, towards the village. Its massive crown of leaves rustled one final farewell to the open sky it had known for so long. Then, with a sound like a vast, deep sigh, it fell. The impact was not a violent crash, but a soft, cushioned hump on the forest floor. It had been laid down with care. It lay perfectly oriented, its roots pointing back towards the sacred grove, its trunk pointing down the path that led to human society. Let's just pause here for a moment and take in this scene. In the sudden, profound silence that followed the fall, a single bird calls from a nearby branch, its song sharp and clear in the still air. The tree lies on the ground, a fallen giant. But it doesn't feel like a death. It feels like a transformation, a change of state, a turning from vertical, rooted solitude to a horizontal potential, ready to be shaped and given a new voice. The villagers, who had been holding their breath, collectively released a soft, unified exhalation. It was done. Fode walked slowly to the fallen trunk. He placed his hand on the wood, which was still warm, still pulsing with residual life. "You are now between worlds," he whispered, his voice full of reverence. "You are no longer of the forest alone, but not yet of the village. Your journey has begun." The next phase of the ritual began immediately. The trunk was carefully trimmed of its branches. These weren't discarded. They were carried reverently back to the village, destined to be used in the ceremonial fire that would hollow out the drum's body. The massive log itself, now smooth and clean, was shouldered by a team of the strongest men. They began a slow, processional walk back to Fode's compound. And as they walked, the women and children followed behind them, singing a song of welcome. It was a beautiful, uplifting melody that already spoke of the drum's future life. The voice has come. The voice has come to sit in the center and speak for all. The tree had become an honored guest in the village. It had been asked, it had been thanked, it had been guided, and now it was being welcomed home. The seemingly violent act of felling had been masterfully transformed into a sacred, gentle transition. Kurgui was no longer just a dim tree in the forest. It was now a patient, silent student, lying in the master drummer's yard, ready to be sculpted, ready to be awakened, ready to learn how to hold a language it had only ever dreamed of in the rustling of the wind. Its education was about to begin. In Fode's compound, under the great, leafy shade of a nim tree, the massive log of Kurgui rested on a bed of forked supports. This next stage was the most physically demanding, but also the most spiritually sensitive part of the entire creation. The work of hollowing was where the solid heart of the tree would be transformed into an empty chamber. It was being prepared as a room for echoes, for resonance, a sacred space for the voices of the ancestors to gather and amplify. Fode began by carefully drawing the outline of the drum's future shape directly onto the log. He used a paste made of white clay, his hand steady and sure. He marked where the distinctive hourglass waist would be, the narrowest point of the drum, and where the wider playing heads would eventually be stretched. He looked over at Lamin, who watched with a newfound sense of awe, his earlier impatience completely gone. Fode gestured to the white lines. "This is the body," he explained, his voice low and respectful. "The waist is where the player holds it, tucked under his arm. It is the bridge between the man and the voice of the drum." The shape was not just for function, it was a physical connection between the musician and the instrument's spirit. The process of hollowing itself relied on two ancient, powerful tools: fire and patience. Along the center of the log, Fode and his helpers built a long, narrow, and meticulously controlled fire. They used the tree's own sacred branches, returning a part of the tree to itself to begin its transformation. They tended this fire for hours, letting the intense heat slowly char and soften the heartwood. The air filled with a unique smell, not of destruction, but of chanja, spicy, smoky perfume that spoke of ancient rituals. As the fire burned down to glowing embers, Fode took up his adze, a traditional tool with a curved blade perfect for scooping. He didn't attack the wood with aggressive force. Instead, he began to scrape and chip away the charred, softened layer, meticulously following the white clay lines he had drawn. The sound was methodical, rhythmic, SHK, SHK, SHK. With each controlled stroke, a blackened curl of wood fell away to the ground, revealing the pale, hard, untouched wood beneath. This was a cycle. Once a layer of charred wood was removed, they would build another small fire inside the newly created hollow. The flames would lick the new surface. The heat would penetrate deeper, and the wood would be softened for the next round of carving. Fire to soften, adze to remove. This painstaking process went on for days. It was hot, smoky, and exhausting work under the African sun. But Fode insisted that it could not be rushed. He explained to Lamin that using a modern machine, like a chainsaw or a large drill, might be faster, but it would be a violation. A machine could crack the wood, creating unseen stresses that would compromise the drum's voice forever. This slow thermal persuasion, this conversation with fire and wood, allowed the log to release its interior at its own pace. It preserved the integrity and the spirit of the shell. During a break, as they sat in the shade sipping cool water, Fode wiped the sweat and soot from his brow. He looked at the hollowed-out log, a deep cavity now forming within it. "We are not cutting out its heart," Fode said, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. "We are asking it to make a space. A space for what? For the Ngelva, ancestral spirits who guide our speech and our rhythms. For the memory of all the rhythms that have ever been played. The drum is not empty. You see a hollow, but it is full of this waiting silence. Our job is to make the chamber perfect, so that when the skin is stretched over it, the silence inside can sing back perfectly." Lamin's perspective shifted completely. He looked at the hollowed trunk and no longer saw an object being carved. He saw a vessel being prepared. The smooth, curved interior they were so carefully creating was like the inside of a giant wooden ear designed to catch the subtlest vibration from the player's hand, to shape it and to project it as a clear, resonant sound that could travel for miles. Each scrape of the adze was tuning this ear, making it more sensitive, more perfect. The work was a meditation. Day after day, the hollow grew deeper and the shell grew thinner. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the sound of the adze. Fode's focus was absolute, his movements economical and precise. He was not just a craftsman. He was a conduit, channeling generations of knowledge into his hands. He read the wood, understood its grain, and listened to its resistance. He knew just how much heat to apply, just how deep to carve with each pass. He was in a deep dialogue with the spirit of the tree. Finally, after more than a week of relentless, patient labor, the hollowing was complete. The once solid log was now a magnificent shell. It was an elegant, hourglass-shaped chamber of smooth, pale wood. But the work wasn't finished. Fode then took handfuls of rough, dried leaves and began to sand the interior, rubbing away any splinters or imperfections. He worked until the inside surface was as smooth as the polished shell of a gourd. The slightest roughness could distort the sound, could interrupt the pure vibration he was seeking. When he was satisfied, he stopped. A quiet reverence fell over the compound. Fode leaned over the drum's body and tapped the outer shell with his knuckle. Dung! The sound that came back was completely different from before. It was clearer, purer, with a long, beautiful sustain. The chamber was alive. It was resonating. The space they had so carefully created was ready to fulfill its purpose. A slow smile touched Fode's lips. He looked at Lamin, his eyes bright with accomplishment and anticipation. "Now," he said, his voice full of satisfaction. "Now it is ready to receive its skin. The body is prepared. Now we must give it a voice." He gestured towards a large clay pot where a carefully prepared goat skin was soaking in a solution of herbs and water, a process that would make it pliable and strong. The journey was nearing its completion. The tree had become a chamber, a resonant body. Soon, the skin of an animal would become its tongue. And the two, the wood and the hide, married together under ritual and skill, would become a new being. A being that could speak the language of the people, carry their stories, and call the spirits. The drum was almost born. The silence was waiting to sing. The drum was now a physical being, resting in Fode's compound. But before it could speak to the village, it had to learn its alphabet. This education took place in the quiet hours of the morning, when the world was still soft with dew. Fode sat with the new drum nestled between his knees, a curved stick held in one hand, his other hand bare and ready to dampen the skin. Lamin, his son, sat just before him, a small practice drum resting in his own lap. Fode's voice was low, cutting through the morning stillness. "First," he said, "you must forget that this is music. You are learning to talk." He leaned in, his eyes fixed on Lamin. "Our language, Wolof, is a tonal language. A word can have different meanings based on the pitch of your voice." He demonstrated, letting the syllable ba ring out with a high tone, then a low tone, and finally a rising tone. Each sound carried a different weight, a different possibility. "The drum hears this," Fode continued, his gaze shifting from his son to the drum. "It mimics it." He brought the curved stick down onto the center of the drum skin. A deep, resonant boom filled the courtyard. "The center of the skin," he explained, "is the low tone." Then, with his fingers, he tapped the very edge, producing a sharp high tack. The edge is the high tone. This was the fundamental principle, the binary code of the drum's speech. Low and high, center and edge, stick and hand. With just these elements, an entire language could be built. Fode began with the simplest phrases, the very foundation of the drum's daily vocabulary. He looked at Lamin, then played a slow, deliberate rhythm, a deep boom, followed by two quick taps, tack-tack, and ending with another deep boom. The pattern hung in the air for a moment. "That means Nana Def," Fode said. "How are you?" He broke it down. The low boom is the respectful greeting tone. It announces your presence with humility. The high talks are the questioning lift, the curiosity in your voice when you ask after someone's well-being. He then played a different pattern, almost a mirror image of the first tack-tack boom. "And that is the reply, Manji Firek, I am here in peace." He explained the nuance, the high notes, the talks. Acknowledge the question you've just been asked. The low boom settles it. It's a statement of presence, of stability. "I am here. All is well." Lamin listened, his face scrunched in concentration. He watched his father's hands, the effortless way they moved, then tried to replicate the patterns on his own small drum. His hands were clumsy at first. The sounds he produced were hesitant, his tones unclear. He would strike the center and get a flat thud instead of a booming resonance. His taps on the edge sounded weak, lacking the sharp clarity of his father's. He was quickly learning that the difference between a communicative tack and a mere tap was immense. It wasn't just about hitting the drum. It was about the precise angle of the stick, the exact part of the hand used to dampen the sound. The subtle tension held in the wrist that could change the pitch and duration of a note. It was a physical conversation with the instrument. Fode didn't correct him with words. That wasn't the way. Instead, he would simply play the phrase again, perfectly. He'd play Nanga Def, and the sound itself, in its perfect clarity, would become the teacher. Lamin would listen, his ears straining to catch the difference, and then try again and again. The courtyard filled with these faltering, then slowly improving, sonic conversations. As the sun climbed higher, they moved on to more practical announcements. the kind of news the drum would carry across the village every day. Fode played a new, more complex rhythm, a deep boom, then a rolling ba-boom, followed by a quick, sharp tack-tack-tack. "The well is deep. Draw carefully," Fode translated. He showed Lamin how the sounds created a picture. The rolling bar, dash boom, created by striking with the stick and quickly muting with the hand, mimicked the sound of a bucket descending into the echoing depths of the well. The quick, urgent tack pattern at the end was the caution, a warning to be mindful. Then came another, tack, boom, a completely different feeling. A child is born in the Sa compound. The energy was palpable in the rhythm. The rapid, joyful high tones were the news spreading like wildfire from one compound to the next. The two solid, low booms at the end gave the announcement its weight and location. They were the solidity of the family name, Sa, anchoring the joyful news to a specific place, a specific family. Let's just pause here for a moment and imagine this scene. The morning air is filled with these nascent conversations between wood, skin, and human intent. A rooster crows somewhere in the distance. It's called just another kind of announcement, but one without this layered, specific meaning. Through this practice, Lamin begins to hear the world differently. Every sound, from the chatter of birds to the rhythm of a blacksmith's hammer, becomes potential speech. This was the drum's first and most essential function. It was the town crier. Its voice could carry farther than any human shout, its message unambiguous to all who knew the code. A birth, a death, a call for a village meeting, a warning of fire or of stray animals in the crop fields, all were communicated not with vague, generic beats, but with specific, tonal sentences. The village lived within a web of these audible signals. It was a sonic landscape of shared information, a constant, low-humming conversation that connected everyone. You didn't need to see the smoke to know there was a fire. The drum would tell you, and it would tell you where. You didn't need a messenger to run from hut to announce a wedding. The drum would sing the news for all to hear. The drum was the loom that wove this intricate web of community. As Lamin's practice continued, he started to grasp the subtleties. He learned how a slight shift in hand pressure could change a statement into a question. He learned the rhythm for the market has fresh fish, a light, dancing pattern, and the rhythm for a storm is coming from the east, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate in your very bones. Each phrase was a piece of a larger puzzle, a vocabulary that painted a complete picture of village life. Fode taught him the rhythm for calling the elders to council, a slow, stately, and deeply respectful sequence of low tones. He taught him the frantic, high-pitched alarm that signaled a lost child, a rhythm designed to cut through all other noise and demand immediate attention from everyone within earshot. Through his father's patient instruction, Lamin wasn't just learning to play an instrument. He was learning the heartbeat of his community. He was being entrusted with its stories, its warnings, its celebrations. The drum was not merely a tool for communication, it was the keeper of their collective identity, and Fode was passing that sacred responsibility down to his son, one rhythm at a time. In the quiet of the morning, in that small courtyard, the soul of the village was being passed from one generation to the next through the resonant voice of the drum. Once Lamin could tap out the basic tones and simple phrases, Fode guided him into the heart of the drum language, the proverbs. This was where the talking drum moved beyond simple utility and became a vessel for philosophy. Proverbs held the compressed wisdom of the ancestors, the moral and ethical code of the Sira people. To translate them into rhythm demanded a completely different way of thinking. Fode would often say, the drum doesn't just say the words of the proverb. It must make you feel its meaning. Listen. He then played a complex, syncopated rhythm. It began with two hesitant, questioning high taps, followed by a low, rumbling roll that seemed to get stuck, and then resolved into a single, clean, decisive boom. Ben Loxo du Tonga Badu Fode explained. A single hand cannot tie a bundle. The hesitant taps represented the futile effort of one hand struggling alone. The rumbling, stuck roll was the sound of the loose, unruly bundle falling apart. And that final, clear boom, that was the solid, undeniable truth of the statement. It is impossible. To truly tie the bundle, you need the rhythm of a second hand, perhaps a second drum or a responding pattern to complete the action. The music itself was the argument. Lamin listened, his brow furrowed in concentration, trying to decode the message, not just in the tones, but in the very spaces between the beats, in the texture of the sound. He was learning to hear a story in the pattern. From proverbs, they moved on to encoding social events. Announcing a marriage wasn't just a simple statement of fact. It was a full-blown, celebratory composition. Fode demonstrated by playing a rhythm that wove together the tonal patterns of two family names. For the bride's family, Ndiaye, he played a low-high-low pattern. For the groom's family, Diop, a high-low fall. He then wrapped these name rhythms in a fast, joyful, interlocking pattern that vibrated with excitement. It represented the families coming together, the dancing, the feasting. To hear it was to know instantly who was marrying whom, and to feel the infectious joy of the community. It wasn't just information. It was an invitation to celebrate. But the most difficult and profound lessons were the historical references. Certain rhythmic phrases acted as shortcuts to entire sagas. Fode played a specific, galloping pattern that came to a sudden, dramatic stop. The cavalry of Mod Asenig, Cumber, Endorphin Famak, he said, his voice low with reverence. This rhythm evoked a famous 19th century Sira king and his legendary warriors. Playing this pattern wasn't just recounting history, it was invoking the very spirit of that time. It summoned the strength, the strategy, the courage of those ancestors, serving as a lesson or an inspiration for the present moment. Fode's eyes held a serious light as he looked at Layman. You must know the story before you can play the rhythm, he said. The rhythm is the shadow of the story. He leaned in closer. If you play the Cumber Endorphin rhythm without knowing about his resistance, without understanding the sacrifices made, you are just making noise. You are a parrot, repeating sounds without meaning. But if you know the story, and you play it with that knowledge in your heart, then you are summoning his presence into this circle. You are making history alive. Let's just pause here for a moment. Imagine being there, under the shade of that neem tree. The air itself seems to thicken with meaning. Lamin is no longer just a boy learning to hit a drumskin. He's learning to think in metaphor. He's learning to translate entire narratives into the physics of vibration. He is being asked to hold the entire moral and historical archive of his people in his muscle memory. The weight of this responsibility is both terrifying and exhilarating. He is being entrusted with the soul of his culture. This was the drum's true role, to be a historian, a teacher, a living library. In the hands of a master like Fode, the talking drum could deliver a moral lesson, reinforce social values, and keep the heroic and cautionary tales of the past vividly present. It could do all of this without a single spoken word. It was education through vibration, a direct transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next, felt deep within the bones. Lamin was learning that the drum wasn't just an instrument. It was the guardian of a people's memory, and his hands were learning how to turn the pages. Finally, Fode taught Lamin the rhythms of extremes, the urgent, mobilizing language of conflict, and the slow, healing language of reconciliation. These were the most powerful and dangerous phrases in the drum's lexicon, played only by authorized masters in specific contexts. To wield them was to hold the very fabric of society in one's hands, with the power to tear it or to mend it. Lamine felt a new weight settle upon his shoulders, a responsibility that went far beyond mere musical skill. The first of these extreme rhythms was the war rhythm, called the Baku. Fode did not play it at its full, terrifying force within the quiet, peaceful compound. Instead, he demonstrated its essence softly, his hands tapping the drum skin with a controlled intensity. But even muted, its character was unmistakable, a primal energy that seemed to hum in the very air. It was a relentless, aggressive, staccato pattern. There were no deep, resolving, low booms that offered comfort or finality. It was all high and mid-tones, sharp and insistent, like 1,000 panicked heartbeats. The rhythm was built on repetition and a terrifying, accelerating speed, creating a sense of escalating urgency that crawled under the skin and tightened the muscles. It bypassed rational thought, speaking directly to an ancient instinct. "This is not a melody," Fode whispered, his voice low and serious, even as his hands became a blur of sharp, precise strikes. "This is an alarm that bypasses the mind and goes straight to the blood. It says, 'Danger. Gather, now, bring your spear.'" He explained how the sound of the Baku, when played with full intent, could travel for miles across the savannah. Every man, every warrior who heard it would instinctively know the direction it came from. More than that, they would understand the level of the threat by its speed. A faster tempo meant a more immediate and severe danger, a call to arms that could not be ignored. Lamin listened, his own heart starting to beat in time with the phantom rhythm, feeling a surge of adrenaline even from this quiet demonstration. He imagined the sound echoing across the plains, a sonic arrow pointing towards a shared crisis, a sound that could unite a scattered people into a single, defensive force in a matter of moments. Then, contrasting this utterly, Fode played the naming. If the Baku was a raging fire, the naming was a slow, deep river. This was the rhythm of mourning and of reintegration, the sound of a community piecing itself back together after being shattered. It was slow, spacious, and filled with a profound, unshakable sorrow. Fode used long, resonant, low tones that seemed to hang in the air like heavy sighs, each one a universe of loss. Between these deep, mournful sighs, in the quiet spaces, he inserted tiny, clear, high-tone patterns. They were delicate and distinct, the tonal equivalents of names whispered into the night. Lamin closed his eyes, and he could almost see them, the faces of the lost, flickering like candle flames in the vast, quiet dark. "After a battle, or a great loss," Fode said, his voice now hushed with reverence, "we play the naming. We play the rhythm of the river, slow and endless." He continued to play, the deep tones washing over the compound. "And into that river we place the names of the fallen." Tak. A long silence followed, filled only by the lingering hum of the drum. Tak-a-tak, another silence, another name given to the flow of time and memory. "Each name is a stone dropped into the water," Fode explained. "The community hears the names. We acknowledge the loss. We face it together." He showed Lamin how the rhythmesque structure was designed to prevent a community from being consumed by its own grief or anger. "The rhythm does not let us forget," he said softly, "but it also does not let us stay in the fury of the Baku. It washes us back towards each other. It is the first stitch in the torn fabric. It was the beginning of healing. A shared sonic space where every member of the community could mourn, remember, and finally begin to rebuild their shared world." Lamin sat in stunned silence, the echo of both rhythms resonating within him. The Baku and the naming were the two poles of communal existence, One represented the violent fragmentation of conflict, the chaos that could tear everything apart. The other represented the painful, careful, deliberate reweaving of peace, the slow and sacred work of making things whole again. The drummer who controlled these rhythms, who knew when and how to play them, held an immense, almost terrifying responsibility. Misusing the baku could plunge a community into panic or trigger an unnecessary, devastating conflict. Its power was so absolute that a moment of poor judgment could lead to generations of bloodshed. On the other hand, playing the naming carelessly was a profound sacrilege. To rush the rhythm, to play it without the proper feeling, or, worst of all, to omit a name, was a denial of a person's entire existence, a tearing of their memory from the community's tapestry. It was a second death, a spiritual erasure that was considered a far greater crime than many physical transgressions. The drummer was not just a musician. He was a historian, a priest, and a judge, all in one. His hands did not just strike a drum, they shaped the collective soul of his people. Fode laid his hands flat on the goatskin, silencing the drum completely. The sudden quiet was as profound as the rhythms themselves. He looked at Lamin, his eyes filled with the gravity of this final lesson. "The drum," he said, his voice clear and steady, "holds the power to break and to mend. It is a tool like a knife. In the hands of a cook, it feeds the family. In the hands of a warrior, it takes life." He tapped the silent drum once more for emphasis. "You must know when to cut and when to suture. Your intention must be as clear as your tone." This was the core of the gemmaster's art. It wasn't just about technique or speed. It was about wisdom, intention, and an unwavering commitment to the well-being of the community. Lamin understood now. His long apprenticeship was not just to an instrument, but to a sacred office. He was learning to be a keeper of the social heartbeat, a mediator between chaos and order, memory and the present moment. He was being entrusted with the very voice of his people. Through the slow, patient teachings of Fode, the drum's language had been revealed to him in its entirety. It was a language that could manage the simple affairs of daily life, teach the deep wisdom of the ancestors through proverbs and stories, rally a nation for war, and most importantly, guide it back from the brink through the difficult process of healing. It was, truly, the voice of the community. And soon, Lamin would see that voice take its most solemn seat. Not on the battlefield or in a mourning circle, but in a place of judgment and truth. He would witness the drum as an impartial witness in the king's court, where its rhythms would not speak of war or grief, but of justice. His training was nearly complete, but his journey as a guardian of the rhythm was just beginning. In the heart of Senegambia, there once stood a tree so immense, so ancient, that it was more than just a tree. It was the Bantaba, the talking place, the tree of judgment. This was the great kapok tree. Its massive, gnarled roots, like the powerful limbs of a giant, formed natural benches, and its vast, leafy canopy cast a deep, dappled shade over the village square. This shade seemed to have a magical quality, cooling not just the humid air, but also the hot tempers of those who gathered beneath it. For generations, this was where the village elders would convene. They didn't sit there as mere individuals, but as the Kangam, the embodied council of the ancestors. Their wisdom was seen as a bridge between the living and the spirits who had walked the same ground before them. And on this particular sweltering afternoon, a serious case was to be heard. It was a dispute that could tear at the very fabric of the community. Two farmers, Sidi and Amadou, whose family compounds stood side by side, were locked in a bitter argument over the boundary between their millet fields. The accusations flew thick and fast. Stones marking the border had been moved in the night. Precious seedlings had been trampled underfoot. What began as a whisper of disagreement had escalated into a roar of accusation. It was a classic land dispute, the kind of conflict that, if left to fester, could split families, turn neighbors into enemies, and simmer with resentment for generations to come. As the sun climbed to its peak, the court began to assemble. The elders, their faces etched with the wisdom of years, took their places on the smoothest, most worn parts of the kapok's roots. Before them, the two farmers, their families, and a crowd of witnesses sat on woven mats, arranged in a semicircle. The air itself felt heavy, thick with unspoken grievances, with the oppressive heat, and with the collective anticipation of the village. But there was another figure present, positioned slightly to the side, in the space between the people and the elders. This was Griata Kelafa, the royal drummer. He wasn't an elder, nor was he a judge, but his status was unique, revered. Tucked snugly under his arm, he held a tama, the small, hourglass-shaped talking drum. His face was a mask of neutrality, his eyes observing everyone and no one at the same time. He wasn't there to provide musical entertainment. He was something far more profound, a sonic witness, a rhythmic scribe, a translator of human truth into the impartial language of vibration. The head elder, a man named Sira, whose eyes were the color of sun-bleached stones, clapped his hands softly. The sound was quiet, yet it carried an undeniable authority that silenced the murmuring crowd. The court was in session. Sarah calmly stated the nature of the dispute, laying out the core of the conflict for all to hear. Then, with a slow, deliberate nod, he gestured to the first farmer, Sidi, inviting him to speak his truth. Sidi rose to his feet, his body tense with emotion. He launched into his testimony, a passionate, almost rambling story of land inherited from his grandfather, of trust violated by his neighbor. And as his words filled the air, Griat Kalafa's hands came to life on the skin of the tama. But Kalafa was not simply drumming along to Sidi's words. He was listening deeper, to the cadence of the speech, to the raw emotion bubbling just beneath the surface. When Sidi's voice climbed in righteous indignation, Kelafa's drum answered with a series of sharp, rising high tones that pierced the afternoon stillness. When Sidi hesitated, his brow furrowed as he searched his memory for a specific date or a detail. The drum produced a soft, hesitant, rolling pattern, a sound that seemed to perfectly mimic the fog of memory itself. And when Sidi stated a fact he held as an absolute certainty, his voice ringing with conviction, "My grandfather planted that baobab tree with his own hands." The drum punctuated his declaration with a single, solid, resonant low note, doom, a sound that hung in the air like an undeniable period at the end of a sentence. The drum wasn't just recording the testimony, it was annotating it in real time. It was providing a subconscious, rhythmic commentary on the quality and sincerity of the words being spoken. The elders, of course, listened carefully to Sidi's story, but they also felt Kelafa's drum. The sharp, angry rhythms put their senses on high alert, signaling them to be cautious of potential bias or exaggeration. The hesitant, rolling beats made them take note of the moments where the testimony might be weak or uncertain. And those solid, booming dooms marked the points of what was most likely unshakable truth. Let's pause here and appreciate what's happening. Under the ancient kapok tree, two distinct narratives are unfolding at the same time. There is the spoken narrative, woven from grievance, memory, and personal perspective. And then there is the drummed narrative, built from cadence, rhythm, and perceived credibility. The villagers, the elders, everyone present, they are all listening to both. Their understanding of the situation becomes layered, more nuanced. The impartial voice of the drum weaves through the human voices, a steady thread of pure vibration in a complex tapestry of conflicting stories. After CD finished and sat down, it was Amadou's turn to speak. His style was completely different. He spoke in a calmer, more methodical tone, laying out his points with careful precision. Yet, beneath his composed exterior, Khalifa's drum detected an undercurrent of wounded pride. The Griat's rhythms adapted instantly. They became more measured, the tones slightly deeper, matching Amadou's calmer demeanor. But these steady beats were interspersed with sudden, tight clusters of high, sharp taps, fired off whenever Amadou's voice betrayed a flash of suppressed anger he was trying to hide. The drum was holding up a mirror, not just to the speaker's words, but to his heart. This was the first and most crucial function of the drum in the Bontaba court, to act as a lie detector of the spirit. It was a deeply held belief that the drum, a sacred instrument connected to the ancestral world, could sense the vibrations of truth and falsehood in a person's Nyama*, their essential life force, their spirit, and then reflect that energy audibly for all to hear. A master drummer like Khalifa was not merely interpreting what he heard, he was channeling, he was a conduit, allowing the truth to flow through him and out into the world through his instrument. In this sacred space, the drum itself became the ultimate witness, and its testimony was delivered in a universal language that existed beyond clever words or manipulative rhetoric. It was the language of pure, unadulterated vibration. The elders listened to both men, and then they listened to the witnesses, each one's testimony accompanied by Khalifa's rhythmic commentary. They heard stories of childhood friendships and adult rivalries, of shared harvests and whispered insults. The drum rose and fell, it tightened and relaxed, it rolled and it struck, painting a sonic picture of the emotional landscape of the dispute. It didn't tell the elders who was right or wrong. It did something more important. It revealed where the truth was firm, where memory was cloudy, where pride was wounded, and where anger was hiding. After everyone had spoken, a deep silence fell over the gathering, broken only by the gentle rustle of the kapok leaves above. The elders did not confer in whispers. They sat in quiet contemplation, their eyes distant. They were not just weighing the spoken words. They were replaying the rhythmic story told by the talking drum, letting its patterns settle in their minds. The drum had provided a framework of emotional and spiritual honesty upon which they could place the facts of the case. Finally, Serra, the head elder, spoke. His voice was calm but firm. He did not declare a winner and a loser. Instead, guided by the insights from both the spoken testimonies and the drum's impartial voice, he proposed a solution. He spoke of the history of their families, the bonds their grandfathers had shared. He acknowledged Sidi's passionate connection to the land and Amadou's feeling of wounded honor, both of which the drum had made clear. The solution was a compromise, a remeasuring of the land not by one man's memory, but by a new agreement, witnessed by the entire village. It was a path forward that allowed both men to retain their dignity. As Sira spoke, Griat Khalifa began to drum again, but this time the rhythm was different. It was a steady, harmonious beat, a rhythm of reconciliation and community. A sound that seemed to pull everyone together, smoothing over the jagged edges of the conflict. And as the sun began to set, casting long shadows from the great kapok tree, the two farmers, Sidi and Amadou, looked at each other, and for the first time that day they gave a slow, hesitant nod of agreement. The Bantaba, with its council of elders and its talking drum, had done its work. It hadn't just settled a dispute, it had begun to heal a rift in the community, ensuring that the rhythm of village life could continue, strong and unbroken. This incredible practice shows us a different way of understanding justice, one that listens not just to words, but to the very energy behind them. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the deepest truths aren't spoken, they're felt. Have you ever wondered what a court case would sound like if truth had its own rhythm? Imagine a trial not just heard with the ears, but felt in the bones, where every testimony, every accusation, and every lie has a unique beat. This isn't a fantasy. It's the world of the griot, the living libraries and musical judges of West Africa. Today, we journey to a small village where a dispute over a single stone marker becomes an epic saga, told not just in words, but on the skin of a drum. This is the story of Khalifa, and how his drum became the ultimate lie detector. In a sun-drenched clearing, beneath the shade of a great mango tree, the village elders gathered. The air was thick with tension. Two farmers, Sidi and Amadou, stood on opposite sides, their faces etched with the stubbornness that only a land dispute can create. Between them lay the heart of the matter, a patch of fertile soil, its boundary marked by a single weathered stone. Sidi claimed Amadou had moved the stone in the dead of night, stealing a precious strip of his ancestral land. Amadou vehemently denied it, his hands gesturing to the heavens as if calling on the ancestors themselves to vouch for his innocence. In a typical court, this would be a matter of he said. But this was no ordinary court. Seated slightly apart from the elders was Khalifa. He wasn't a judge, nor was he a lawyer. He was the village griot. Before him rested his gem drum, its goatskin head worn smooth by countless stories. He was the sonic witness, the translator of truth. His role wasn't to decide guilt or innocence, but to make the very heart of the conflict audible, to weave the unseen currents of honesty and deceit into a rhythmic tapestry for all to hear. The trial began, and as the first witness was called, Khalifa's hands hovered over the drum, ready to listen. The first to speak was a neighbor. He claimed he saw something suspicious near the boundary marker at dusk. As he spoke, his eyes darted nervously between Sidi and Amadou, never quite settling on either. He fidgeted, his words stumbling over each other. Khalifa's fingers began to dance on the drum. It wasn't a strong, confident beat. Instead, he produced a skittish, fluttering rhythm. Quick, light taps on the high-pitched edge of the drum, a pattern that never resolved into a solid, grounding phrase. It was the sound of uncertainty. The rhythm mimicked the witness's avoidant gaze, the restless shifting of his feet. It suggested a man who wasn't necessarily lying, but who wasn't sure of what he saw. Perhaps it was a man, perhaps just a shadow in the fading light. The drum didn't accuse him of perjury. It simply painted a sonic picture of his doubt, a picture the elders could feel and interpret. The rhythm said, "This testimony is built on shifting sand, not solid rock." Next, an old woman was helped forward. Her back was bent with age, but her eyes were clear and sharp. She didn't look at the farmers or the elders. Her gaze was fixed on a point in the distance, seeing a landscape that existed 50 years ago. She spoke of the boundary as she remembered it from her girlhood, when she played hide-and-seek among the baobab trees that once stood there. Her voice was thin and cracked, but her words were steady, unwavering. As she spoke, Khalifa's drumming transformed. The skittish tapping vanished, replaced by a slow, deep, and resonant rhythm. He used the bass tones at the center of the drum, creating a sound that felt ancient and profound. It was the rhythm of memory itself, patient, layered, unshakable. It felt like the slow, steady heartbeat of the earth. Woven into this deep, foundational beat, Khalifa inserted a clear, simple, three-note pattern. This was the rhythmic signature for baobab, the very tree the old woman used as her landmark. By playing the rhythm of the baobab within the rhythm of her memory, Khalifa's drum was affirming the consistency and strength of her testimony. It felt, through the drum, like bedrock. The elders nodded slowly, their bodies swaying almost imperceptibly to the deep, honest pulse. The drum was telling them, This is a truth rooted in time itself. The atmosphere grew more intense. The weight of the old woman's testimony, amplified by Kalafa's drum, seemed to settle heavily on Sidi. He could feel the case turning against him. The patient, methodical process was frustrating him. He needed to change the narrative. In a sudden burst of anger, his face contorted with rage. He pointed a trembling finger at Amadou. He didn't just move the stone. He shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "This man is a cheat. He cheated us all during the last harvest's communal labor. He pretends to be honest, but he is a thief in our midst." The outburst sent a shockwave through the gathering. This was a new, far more serious accusation, thrown into the proceedings not as evidence, but as a weapon of frustration. All eyes darted from Sidi to Amadou, then to the elders, and finally to Khalifa. What would the drum say now? And in that moment, Khalifa did the most dramatic thing possible. His hands, which had been in constant motion, froze. The drum fell completely silent. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. The sudden absence of sound was deafening, more powerful and shocking than any beat he could have played. It was the drum's gasp. The sonic soul of the trial had just held its breath. This silence was a statement. It signaled a break in the proceedings, an escalation that had stepped outside the bounds of the agreed-upon issue. It was a rhythmic red flag, indicating that this new accusation was born from raw, uncontrolled anger, not from a place of measured truth. After those 3 heart-stopping beats of silence, Khalifa's hands returned to the drum. But the rhythm was different now. It was a low, deep, continuous roll, like the rumble of distant thunder. It wasn't complex or melodic. It was a warning, a rhythmic frown. It was the sound of caution, the drum itself advising the elders to be wary of this new path the conflict was taking. The elders, masters of interpreting these sonic cues, understood immediately. The drum's silence and subsequent warning didn't declare Amadou innocent of moving the stone. That was still to be decided. But it cast serious doubt on Sidi's motives at this specific moment. It separated the original dispute from this new, emotionally charged accusation, allowing the judges to see it for what it was, a desperate, angry gambit, not a piece of reasoned evidence. Throughout this entire drama, from the nervous neighbor to the furious outburst, Khalifa himself remained a neutral conduit. His own opinion on the matter was completely irrelevant. He was not a judge. He was an instrument. His incredible skill was in his listening, deep, empathetic listening that allowed the drum to become a living membrane, vibrating between the chaotic human drama and the cool, clear realm of ancestral judgment. The rhythms he played were not his own compositions. He didn't decide to play a nervous rhythm or a warning roll. Instead, these rhythms were drawn out of the situation by his profound sensitivity to the emotional and psychological undercurrents of the trial. He was the tool through which the mood, the tension, and the subtle energies of honesty and deceit were made audible for all to hear. The elders heard the words, but through Khalifa's drum, they felt the truth behind them. This process was not quick. It could go on for hours, a slow unfolding of truth and consequence. Khalifa's drum provided a continuous narrative, a flowing river of sound that ran parallel to the short, sharp streams of spoken testimony. For the community gathered around, it was a completely immersive experience. They weren't just watching a trial. They were participating in it with their entire beings. They felt the emotional and ethical contours of the dispute through their skin and in their bones. The nervous energy of the first witness made them feel uneasy. The deep, steady beat of the old woman's memory made them feel grounded. Sidi's angry outburst and the drum's subsequent silence made their own hearts skip a beat. The Griot's drum ensured that the trial was a holistic event. It engaged logic, emotion, and spirit in equal measure. It prevented the trial from becoming a cold, sterile exchange of words and elevated it into a communal ceremony of truth-seeking. It was a reminder that justice isn't just about facts and laws. It's about balance, harmony, and understanding the whole truth, the audible and the inaudible. It's a powerful lesson, showing us that sometimes, to truly understand what is being said, we need to listen not just to the words, but to the rhythm that lies beneath. After all the testimony had been heard, a profound quiet settled over the Bontaba. The elders, seated in a semicircle of worn, respected chairs, leaned in towards each other, their heads bowed. Their voices were a low murmur, a soft rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze, a stark contrast to the passionate arguments that had just filled the air. The drum, which had punctuated every testimony, every emotional peak, was silent now. But this was a different kind of silence. It wasn't empty, it was a gathering silence, a condensation of meaning, thick with unspoken thoughts and shared history. The entire village, packed into the clearing, held its breath. The quiet was palpable, thrumming with anticipation for the judgment that was to come. After several long moments, the head elder, Sero, a man whose face was a map of seasons and wisdom, straightened up. He had reached a consensus with his fellow elders. He slowly turned his gaze from them to face the two farmers, Amadou Diop and Sidi Ndi, who stood at the center of the circle, their faces etched with anxiety. Sira's eyes then swept over the rest of the community, acknowledging their shared investment in this moment of justice. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, his eyes found Griat Kalofa, the keeper of the drum and the village's memory. Sera gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. This was the signal everyone was waiting for. It meant the verdict would not first be spoken by a human tongue. It would be delivered by the drum. Kalofa, who had been sitting still as a statue beside his instrument, closed his eyes. He took a long, deep breath, centering himself, connecting with the generations of Griots who had sat in this very spot before him. Then his hands, calloused and knowing, found the taut skin of the drum. He didn't erupt into a complex, fiery rhythm. Instead, he began with a phrase so fundamental that every person, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, recognized it instantly. It was the foundational rhythm of the village's own name, a sequence of beats that meant home, us, belonging. It was a reminder that before they were individuals in conflict, they were one people, bound by this shared space and shared identity. After playing this grounding rhythm, he paused, letting the notes hang in the charged air. Then his hands moved again, this time with sharp precision. He played a short, clear patterned, the distinct tonal signature for Amadou Diop. The sounds were as unique and identifiable as a spoken name. He followed it with another pattern, a solid, thudding beat that meant the stone, the very object at the heart of their dispute. Then came a third phrase, a series of tones that rose in pitch and then fell, a sonic arc that translated to was moved. A ripple of understanding, a collective murmur ran through the crowd. The drum had spoken a fact. It had not assigned blame or intent, but it had established a physical truth based on the evidence presented. The stone had been moved from its original position, and this movement was connected to Amadou. Kalafa's hands then conjured another name from the drumhead. He played the rhythm for Sidi Ndi. The beats were quick, agitated, mirroring the man's own temperament. Next, he played the pattern for Saw. And then he introduced a complex, uncertain sequence of wavering high and low tones. It was a rhythm that fluttered, hesitated, and lacked a firm landing. It was the sound of a shadow, not certainty. It meant that what Sidi had seen was indistinct, unreliable, perhaps a trick of the light or of his own anger. Another murmur, louder this time, swept through the band. The drum had now assessed the testimony. It had weighed the certainty of one man's claim against the evidence and found it wanting. It acknowledged that CD had seen something, but it declared his interpretation to be flawed, clouded. Finally, the moment of judgment arrived. All eyes were fixed on Khalifa and his drum. The two farmers stood frozen, their fates suspended in the patterns of sound that were about to be woven into the air. Khalifa's posture changed. He straightened his back, and his strikes became deeper, more resonant, carrying the full weight of the elder's authority. He played the concluding rhythms. First, a deep, slow, rolling pattern that evoked the vastness and endurance of the earth. This wasn't just soil. It was their heritage, their provider, the ground upon which their laws were built. Then came an interlocking, reparative pattern. The beats wove in and out of each other, creating a rhythm of mending, of joining together what had been separated. It was the rhythm for a shared boundary. And lastly, Khalifa unleashed the most solemn and powerful rhythm of all. A series of low, profound booms that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath them. It was a vibration felt not just in the ears, but in the chest, in the bones. This was the rhythm that meant the ancestors are watching. It was a final, undeniable seal on the judgment. A reminder that their actions were witnessed not just by the living community, but by the unbroken chain of generations who had established these very customs. Then he stopped. His hands lifted from the drum and rested in his lap. Absolute silence returned, but it was a silence of completion. The verdict was complete. It hung in the air, a fully formed truth, before a single spoken word had been uttered. The meaning was clear to all. Amadou had moved the stone, but it was likely an accident, an inadvertent consequence of his ploughing. CD had seen something, but his anger had magnified it, leading him to make a more serious accusation than the facts supported. The resolution, therefore, was one of restoration, not punishment. The original boundary, as recalled by the old woman and anchored by the ancient baobab tree, was to be remarked. But it would not be a task for one man. Both Amadou and Sidi would perform the labor together in the presence of the council at the first light of dawn. They would share the work of mending the land, and in doing so, mending their relationship and the tear in the community fabric. The matter was settled. Only after the drum had fallen silent and its message had settled into the hearts of the people did Elder Sarah finally speak. His voice was calm, measured, and clear. He began to articulate, word for word, what the drum had already so eloquently communicated. His speech was not a new declaration. It was a translation, a confirmation of the vibrational verdict, rendering it from the language of rhythm back into the language of human speech for the sake of absolute clarity. The power of this process was profound and undeniable. The verdict delivered by the drum was felt by everyone as impartial, ancestral, and inevitable. It wasn't the opinion of Sira or the other elders. It was the wisdom of the village itself, channeled through its most sacred voice. It is far harder to argue with a rhythm that resonates in your very bones than it is to dissect and dispute words that can be twisted and turned. The drum spoke the law, not as a human decree, but as a natural consequence, as clear and firm as the deep, resounding doom that marked an unshakable truth. In this way, justice was not simply heard with the ears. It was resonated into the community's very being. The harmonic balance that the dispute had disrupted was not just restored, it was retuned, bringing everyone back into alignment with the deep, ancient rhythm of their shared life. Not far from the Bantba, where the sound of a crackling radio now wrestled with the rustle of the Niem trees, lived a man named Demba. He was older than most, so old his hands were a living map of rivers and droughts, his back permanently curved like a question mark etched into the landscape. He was a Griot Kalofa of an older style, a true master of the Sabaru dialect of the drum language. This was a specific, intricate vocabulary used only in the northern Sira villages. And he knew with a quiet certainty that settled deep in his bones, his workshop wasn't a place of noisy construction, but one of maintenance and memory. Drums of every imaginable size and age hung from the rafters of his open-sided shelter, like sleeping bats waiting for twilight. Some had skins that were grey and slack with age, their voices muted by time, their stories whispered. Others, like his own prized Tama, were kept tight and ready for action, their wooden bodies oiled to a deep, lustrous shine, gleaming in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the shade. This morning, Demba wasn't preparing for a grand court ceremony or a boisterous village festival. He was performing his weekly, private ritual, the tuning of the elders. He reached up and carefully took down an ancient, large bass drum, the ender. Its goatskin head was parched and dry, thirsty from the week's heat. He set it gently between his knees, took a small clay pot of water, and with a soft piece of cloth, began to lovingly moisten the skin around its edges. He wasn't soaking it. That would be a brute's approach. He was coaxing humidity back into it, patiently reminding it of its flexibility, of its youth. As he worked, he hummed a low, continuous melody. It was an old tuning song, its lyrics a long, rolling list of the names of great drums from history, drums that had spoken for kings and announced revolutions. His fingers, gnarled but sensitive, then tested the tension of the ropes that laced the skin to the wooden body. He tightened a peg here, loosened a knot there, his ear cocked, listening for a secret language only he could understand. He would tap the center. Boom. The sound was flat, lifeless. He'd adjust again, a minute turn of a peg. He'd tap again. Boom. Closer now, a flicker of its true self. A final, infinitesimal adjustment. A breath held. Boom. There it was. The deep, clear, foundational tone of truth. The drum was awake. It had found its voice once more. This was his quiet, sacred work, tending the voices of the past, ensuring they did not fall silent. Each drum in his care wasn't just an instrument. It was a personality, a being with a name and a history. The ender he just tuned was called Kothi, named for the thunder. This very drum had been played at the installation of his own grandfather as the village chief generations ago. Its deep, resonant voice had announced that solemn event, its vibrations carrying the weight of leadership across the savannah. By keeping its pitch true, by ensuring it could still speak with that same authority, Demba was keeping that memory acoustically alive. He wasn't just tuning a drum. He was preserving a moment in time. But there was a greater, more haunting work that occupied his days, the tending of his own memory. The full, complex grammar of the Sabaru drum language, with its thousands of proverbial phrases, its intricate historical references, its specific legal nuances that could settle disputes or declare war, it all existed now in only one place in the entire world. Not in books, not on scrolls, but in the neural pathways of his mind and the muscle memory of his hands. There were no written records, no dictionaries. The great chain of oral transmission, a chain that had survived centuries of wars and droughts and famines, was now fraying to a single, fragile thread. That thread was him. Sometimes young men would come. They were usually sent by their fathers, men who remembered the old ways, who felt a pang of nostalgia or duty. They would sit with him for an afternoon under the shade of the shelter, surrounded by the silent council of drums. Demba would demonstrate, his hands a blur of practiced grace. He'd play a beautiful, complex phrase, the rhythm for the mango ripens from the inside out, a proverb about patience and the development of inner worth. The boy would try to mimic it. His hands would be clumsy, his focus entirely on the mechanics, the physical act of hitting the skin. He couldn't hear the meaning behind the rhythm. Frustration would quickly set in. After all, they had phones in their pockets, devices that could play 1,000 different songs from across the world with the press of a button. Why, they would wonder, should they spend months, even years, learning to say just one thing on a drum? The allure of the new was just too strong, the patience required for the old too demanding. Demba would eventually send them away with a sad smile, never with anger or bitterness. He understood the world had changed. The drum was no longer the fastest way to send a message. The telegraph, the phone, the internet had seen to that. It was no longer the only way to record history. Books and digital files held that domain now. Its practical utility had all but faded into obscurity. What remained was its soulland. Souls, Demba knew, are so much harder to teach than simple skills. The meaning was the heart of it, and the boys only wanted to learn the hands. Let's just pause here for a moment. In the quiet of Demba's shelter, the only sounds are the gentle tap-tap of his fingers on drumheads and the distant, plaintive bleat of a goat. The hanging drums are like silent pupils in an empty classroom, waiting patiently for a lesson that may never come again. They are repositories of a language that is about to lose its last native speaker. He finishes tuning Kothian, with a gentle heave, hangs it back in its designated place among its brethren. He gives its smooth wooden body a final, affectionate pat, as if reassuring it, promising it that he hasn't forgotten. He sits back on his stool, his work for the morning done. His eyes drift across the silent assembly. There's the small talking drum, the tmar, whose high-pitched tones could mimic human speech with uncanny accuracy, used to send gossip or urgent news across valleys. There's the set of 3 sabar drums, which, when played together, could tell the entire epic of the founding of their people. Each drum was a chapter, each rhythm a verse. He could still play them all. He could make them sing the stories of heroes and tricksters, of great hunts and bitter betrayals. He closes his eyes and the rhythms fill his mind unbidden. The beat for a single bracelet does not jingle, a call for community and cooperation. The complex cadence that warns the river may be calm on the surface, but the crocodile is patient below, a lesson in watchfulness. These were not just sounds, they were wisdom, philosophy, law, and history, all encoded in percussion. It was a library of the mind, a culture carried on waves. A wave of profound loneliness washes over him, a feeling as deep and vast as the night sky. Who would tune these drums when he was gone? Who would know that Korthi's voice should sound like thunder, not a dull thud? Who would remember the rhythm for patience? The knowledge felt like a heavy weight in his chest, a treasure with no one to inherit it. It was a strange kind of wealth, one that grew heavier the less you could share it. He knows the world sees him as a relic, a charming but irrelevant echo of a bygone era. The tourists sometimes stop taking pictures of the old man with his quaint instruments. They hear noise, a pleasingly ethnic beat. They don't hear the words. They don't hear the soul. They smile and toss a coin, and move on, their understanding as shallow as a footprint in the dust. But Demba is not bitter. Sadness, yes, but not bitterness. The world spins on, and it does not ask for permission. The neem tree rustles, the radio plays its foreign pop songs, and the goats bleat. Life continues in a different key to a different rhythm. He picks up his small tama, cradling it in his lap. His fingers begin to tap out a slow, quiet rhythm, a phrase not for a festival or a king, but for himself. It's a rhythm that says, even when the forest is gone. The wind still remembers the shape of the leaves. It's a song of memory, a quiet act of defiance against the encroaching silence. He plays for the drums, for his ancestors, and for the wind, hoping it might just carry the tune a little further. After his tuning ritual, Demba would often find a quiet spot in the shade, his own tama cradled in his lap. This wasn't a performance for the village or for any audience. This was a private conversation, a communion with the language of the drum itself. It was a time to test his own recall against the vastness of silence, to ensure the stories held within his hands were still sharp, still true. He played not for applause, but for the ancestors who had passed down this knowledge, and for the integrity of his own memory. He would begin simply with the rhythms of daily life. His hands moved with an unconscious grace, tapping out phrases that everyone understood. The sun is high, a bright, steady beat. The cattle are at the well. A slower, more deliberate rhythm. These were the conversational tones of the drum, clean and effortless, like speaking your mother tongue. They were the warm-up, the familiar ground before venturing into the deeper, more complex territories of his memory. Once his hands were limber and his mind was settled, he would take a deep breath and delve into the archives of sound. The first great test was always the genealogy of the Fall family. This was no simple list of names. It was a rhythmic epic, a 10-minute composition of interlocking patterns that chronicled the family's lineage stretching back 8 generations. He closed his eyes, his face becoming a mask of pure concentration. Each rhythm represented a name, a deed, a significant moment in the family's history. The composition was a rolling narrative of births, of great battles won and lost, of long migrations across arid landscapes, all told through the precise interplay of tone and tempo. His fingers danced across the drumhead, weaving a complex tapestry of sound. To falter here, to miss a beat or confuse a pattern would be more than a musical mistake. It would be a historical one. It would be like breaking the chain of lineage, losing a branch of the family tree from the communal memory forever. The pressure was immense, but it was a sacred pressure. The weight of a historian carrying his library not in books, but in his very muscles. After successfully navigating the intricate paths of genealogy, he would move on to the proverbs of governance. These were the ethical and philosophical cornerstones of his community, encoded into sound. He played a sharp, staccato, back-and-forth rhythm, a rhythmic argument that declared, "A chief who does not listen is a tree without roots." It was a warning, a piece of political wisdom captured in a few seconds of urgent percussion. Then his hands would slow, creating a patient, deliberate build-up of sound, each note placed with care. This rhythm spoke a different truth. The termite mound is built one grain at a time. It was a lesson in patience, perseverance, and the power of collective effort. Each proverb was a tiny, self-contained capsule of philosophy, a moral lesson that could be transmitted across the village square, understood instantly by all who heard it. These were not just clever sayings. They were the operating principles of their society, kept alive not on paper, but in the vibrant, living pulse of the drum. Then, his journey through memory would take him to the weather chronicles. These were not abstract meteorological reports, but visceral, acoustic archives of survival. He would summon a frantic, rushing pattern of high, tight tones, a cascade of sound that mimicked a sudden downpour. This was the rhythm for the year the rain came early and washed away the sorghum. It was a rhythm of panic, of loss, of nature's unpredictable power. In contrast, he would then play a dry, sparse, hesitant sequence, punctuated by long, unnerving silences. The notes were like single drops of water falling onto parched earth. This was the sound of the great drought when the river spoke in whispers. It captured the fear, The thirst, the slow creeping dread of a community on the brink. These were not just descriptions. They were shared memories of hardship and endurance. They were rhythmic reminders of how the community had faced catastrophe and survived. Their resilience encoded into the very patterns his hands were now tracing. As he played, deep in this trance of remembrance, he would sometimes falter. A sequence would hesitate for a fraction of a second. A familiar pattern would suddenly feel foreign, its edges blurring in his mind. In those moments, he would stop. The flow would be broken. His brow would furrow in deep concentration, his eyes staring into the middle distance, as if he could see the rhythm floating there, just out of reach. He was chasing the ghost of a sound, a phantom sequence that had been solid just a moment before. Sometimes, after a tense pause, it would return. The connection would be re-established, and his hands would resume their dance, a wave of relief washing over him. But sometimes it wouldn't. The rhythm would slip away, elusive as a fish darting into dark, murky water, and it would be gone. Those moments filled him with a quiet, creeping panic. This wasn't like forgetting a tune from a song. It was a profound and terrifying loss. A forgotten rhythm could be a forgotten law, a lost piece of an essential story, a vibrant color fading from the intricate tapestry of their collective understanding. It was a hole torn in the fabric of their history, a silence where there should have been a voice. In these moments of struggle, he wasn't just testing the memory of his own skin. The neural pathways in his brain that had been forged over decades of practice. He was also testing what he believed to be the memory of the drum itself. He was convinced that a well-made, well-used drum, a drum that had spoken these languages for generations, absorbed the rhythms played upon it. He felt that his tama, having voiced these proverbs and chronicles for so long, held a faint, resonant echo of them within its wood and hide. He believed it could help guide his hands when his own mind hesitated, that the instrument itself was a partner in the act of remembrance. The drum wasn't just an object, it was his ally, a co-conspirator against the inevitable erosion of time. It held the ghosts of sounds past, and sometimes, if he listened closely enough, it would whisper them back to him. His practice was a dialogue between his memory and the drums, a shared effort to keep the flame of knowledge burning bright against the winds of forgetfulness. This solitary ritual was Demba's most important work. It was the painstaking maintenance of a living library. Each session in the shade was an act of defiance against forgetting, a reaffirmation of his role as a guardian of his people's soul. He played for the ancestors, for the children yet to be born, and for the silent, knowing presence of the drum itself, his constant companion on this sacred journey through time. The rhythms were more than music. They were the lifeblood of his culture, and as long as he could play them, that culture would continue to breathe. One afternoon, a teenage relative, Madhu, was sent by his father to spend time with the old man. Demba, the family griot, watched as the boy sat with him. Madhu was polite, but his attention was a flickering candle in the wind. His gaze constantly pulled down to the sleek smartphone he tried to check discreetly in his lap. Demba saw this, not with judgment, but with a deep, weary acceptance. The world had changed, and the old ways were becoming faint echoes. He decided to try something different today. "Come, Demba," said softly, his voice a gentle rasp like dry leaves. He patted the woven mat beside him. "I will not teach you a history today. I will teach you one phrase. Just one. A beautiful one." Intrigued by the promise of brevity, Madhu finally put his phone away. His curiosity piqued. Demba picked up his tama, the talking drum that had been his companion for decades. He settled it under his arm, his fingers finding their familiar place on the goatskin head. Then he began to play. It wasn't a story of kings or battles. It was a fluid, undulating rhythm, a piece of pure poetry in sound. The phrase started with a series of soft, low ripples, a sound like water gently flowing over smooth river stones. You could almost feel the cool current. Then a new pattern emerged, a sequence of clear, high, falling notes, crisp and distinct, like the first drops of a sudden downpour. The two patterns then began to dance together, intertwining in a delicate conversation. The steady water rhythm embraced the cascading rain rhythm, before they merged into a single, deep, resonant, and utterly contented boom. The final note hung in the air, rich and full, fading slowly into the afternoon quiet. The sound was mesmerizing. Madhu, who had expected a dry lesson, was genuinely captivated. The rhythm had painted a picture in his mind. "What does it mean?" he asked, his voice filled with a sincere wonder that warmed Demba's heart. "It means the river remembers the rain," Demba said, a distant, thoughtful look in his eyes. He wasn't just looking at the boy. He was looking back through time. "We play it to give thanks to an elder for a wisdom they shared long ago. It's a way of saying, what you gave me then still nourishes me now. Just like the river is still full from last season's rains. We play it to settle an old debt without words. To acknowledge that a past kindness is still flowing, still alive in the present." He looked at Madhu, hoping the weight of the meaning would land. This wasn't just a beat. It was a core value of their people, captured in sound. He began to teach it to the boy, piece by piece. The low, rippling tone of the river, the high, sharp notes of the rain, the final, grateful boom. Madhu tried. He really did. But his hands, so nimble and quick when tapping on a glass screen, were clumsy on the drum. They struggled with the subtle squeeze and pressure needed to create that watery, low tone. The rain pattern, which should have been light and clear, came out too fast, a jumbled, clattering noise that lacked grace. Yet he kept trying. The beauty of the meaning, the idea of a river remembering the rain, had spurred him on. He wanted to make that sound. Their hands met on the drum. Demba's, ancient and weathered, a map of 1,000 stories etched into the skin. Madhu's, young and smooth, full of a different kind of potential. Together they worked on the same drum skinner, poignant, fleeting image of fragile transmission. One generation trying to pass a living piece of its soul to the next. After an hour of patient repetition, Madhu could produce a rough approximation of the phrase. It was recognizable. You could hear the shape of the river and the rain, but it lacked the soul. It didn't have the liquidity, the flow, the deep feeling that Demba poured into it. It was like a sketch of a masterpiece, capturing the outline but none of the color or emotion. Just then, the bell for the afternoon prayer sounded from the nearby mosque. It was a welcome interruption for Madhu. Relieved, he quickly stood up, thanked his great-uncle, and hurried off. His mind was already back with his friends, his phone, and the fast-paced world it represented. Demba was left alone in the courtyard as the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows. He watched the boy go, then picked up his tama one last time. He played the phrase again, but this time for himself. It was perfect. The water rippled with memory. The rain fell with grace. The deep, grateful boom resonated through the now empty compound, its vibration traveling out into the gathering dusk. He knew, as the last note died away into silence, that this would likely be the last time that phrase was ever played with its full intention, its full understanding. The knowledge felt heavy, but inevitable. Madhu might remember the pattern for a week, or a month, maybe even a year. He might even show it to a friend as a cool trick he learned from his old relative, but he would not know when to use it. He would unfeel the specific weight of gratitude for a long-past kindness that it was meant to convey. The context, the emotion, the entire reason for its existence. The asterisk, why asterisk, would be lost. It was the difference between knowing the words to a prayer and feeling faith in your heart. This beautiful phrase, and 1,000 others like it, would eventually fade. First from a language into a mere sound, then from a sound into silence. The great river of memory would continue to flow, of course, but one of its most beautiful tributaries, this specific, rhythmic way of saying thank you and I remember, was drying up. Soon, its riverbed would be overgrown and forgotten, as if it had never been there at all. Demba placed the drum gently on the mat beside him. His work was done. For years, he had been a keeper of these memories, a storyteller, a griot. But now, he had become something else. He was a living archive, and soon, he would be a sealed one. The stories would be laid to rest with him, silent forever. Thank you for joining us tonight on this journey with the Drummers of Senegambia. The fire is ash now, a soft grey mound under the immense, starry bowl of the night. The last, perfect echo of the phrase, "The river remembers the rain," has dissolved into the silence from which all rhythm springs. For a brief, powerful time, we have entered a world where vibration was vocabulary, where a hollowed tree and a stretched skin became the community's tongue, its legal code, its history book, and its moral compass. We began our journey in the forest, not just looking for wood, but listening for it. We watched as a tree was selected. Its spirit respectfully asked for permission before it was felled. We followed its transformation from a living part of the forest into a vessel of ancestral voices, a drum ready to speak for generations. We learned a language not of letters and words, but of pulses and beats. A language where proverbs and personal names were not spoken, but drummed into the air, felt in the chest just as much as they were heard by the ear. It was a language that carried news of a birth across miles of savannah and announced a death with a somber, irrefutable rhythm. We sat in the shade of the kapok tree, the ancient seat of the village court. Here, we didn't just hear arguments, we felt justice resonate. Before a single human voice was raised in judgment, the drums would speak, laying out the history of the dispute, the laws of the community, and the wisdom of the elders. The rhythm itself was the first witness, the first argument, the first verdict. It was a system where truth had a certain frequency, and falsehood felt out of sync. It was a communication that engaged the whole person, body, mind, and spirit, a way that our modern, text-based world can barely imagine. And then we sat with the last master, a man whose hands are a living library. In the intricate patterns he plays, we can hear a grammar that is fading, a vast vocabulary of meaning that is slowly retreating into the finality of silence. His students are few, the pull of the modern world strong. The story of these drums is therefore not just a story of a fascinating tradition, it is a story of a profound, holistic intelligence, a way of being in the world where community was literally woven together with sound. Its decline is not merely the replacement of one technology, the drum, with another, the smartphone. It is the loss of a complete sensory and social language. It is the quieting of a symphony that once bound everyone together. As we leave this place and sleep draws near, take a moment to feel your own heartbeat. It is the simple, foundational pulse that connects you to every living thing. Let your breath be the gentle rhythm of a calm, undeniable truth. And in the quiet spaces between your thoughts, just listen. Perhaps you can hear it in the depths of your own memory, the faintest echo of a pattern, a rhythm that says you belong, a beat that means this is our law, a pulse that whispers we remember. It is the echo of a time when community itself was a grand symphony, and every single person knew the score, playing their part in perfect harmony. The world of the talking drums may be fading, but the need for what they represent: deep connection, shared understanding, and a sense of belonging is more urgent than ever. As we move through our own noisy, complex lives, may we seek to create our own rhythms of connection. May the patterns of your own life be clear, your meanings deep, and your connections truly resonant. You are now under Baobab skies. Thank you for watching.